Good morning to you. It was Bridgerton or bust for super fans of the Netflix hit show in Detroit who shelled out hundreds of dollars for a costume-themed event filled with Regency-era charm, recreated from scenes in the series. But let's just say this was not a Shonda Rhimes production. In fact, people who went said it was a royal hot mess.
It's been 2 days since the Detroit Bridgerton ball took place here at the historic Harmony Club, and people who are excited to be here, super fans of the show, say there are still so many unanswered questions, and at this point, they just want their money back.
Expectation versus reality. A far cry from the glamorous and opulent night these superfans had pictured.
After trying to contact them multiple times yesterday for an interview, Uncle and Me sent the following statement this afternoon, saying in part, "We understand that not everyone had the experience they hoped for at our most recent event Sunday night at the Harmony Club, and for that we sincerely apologize." They go on to say they are working diligently to address all concerns and reviewing compensation options to make things right.
Hello and welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we are going to be doing something new. We are going to be talking about Bridgerton. And me being a guy, I don't really know that much about it. So I brought in a guest to educate me and kind of help me figure out what exactly I'm watching here. I watched maybe 2 or 3 episodes of season 1. I walked away scratching my head. I watched the first episode of season 2. Didn't understand what's going on. Tried getting through the first episode of season 3. But I got distracted by what's going on in a certain Middle Eastern country. But to educate me here is Dara Sanders, the chairwoman for the Alexandria Film Festival and frequent guest on the show. Dara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Luca. Thanks for having me on. I thank you for providing me with this homework assignment. This is good for me. I thought I was back in school. I really appreciate.
Well, whenever I give out an assignment, I take part in it too. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. So, like, binging is kind of how, all Americans now that have these subscriptions are consuming, these shows. We're just binging them. Right. So so that's what I did. I had already watched season 1. So I binged season 2 Friday and Saturday and a bit this morning.
So here's the thing. I really didn't know much about Bridgerton. I've heard of it, but I didn't give it much thought. I only developed a sort of, I guess you could say, interest after hearing about the scandal in Detroit from a few months back where people were trying to take part in a Bridgerton party that didn't go exactly as planned. And from there, it kind of piqued my interest a little bit. And what fascinates me is, is that this is a show that has become a global phenomenon, has the, interest of millions and millions of viewers. But when I actually tried watching it, it really didn't resonate with me. And it actually left me with more questions than answers. So far as I know, it's about the upper crust of British society during the Regency era, who are trying to, I guess, hook up with one another. Is that?
Well, that's kind of reductive, but okay. So let's just say that
I'm a guy. I'm sorry.
No, I understand. And one of the questions you asked me when we were kind of chatting through email is, what is the appeal for a guy? Right. And I really, really thought about this. And one of the things before we kind of get into Bridgerton that I thought about when I was walking my dog is, I think it's undersells men to say they don't like drama and gossip, right? Which Bridgerton gives you like in droves, right? So men watch wrestling. Wrestling gives you, it's a soap opera now. Me growing up, wrestling was not on that level. It's now a soap opera. There's drama. There are villains, right? There are characters you root for, right? This is what Bridgerton gives you. If you're a person that kind of appreciates a lot of the period pieces from like the 90s and 2000s, we were talking before off camera about, Bleak House. There's always Upstairs, Downstairs, which is, kind of the precursor to Downton Abbey, right? Where you see the the servants and the upper crust, right? And so they have agency, right? Bridgerton does not give you this. Bridgerton is a kind of a shallow interpretation of British society at that time, and it focuses mainly on the debutante debut, essentially, right? So we're introduced to a number of families, the Featheringtons with, Lady Featherington and her gambling addicted husband. We're introduced to the Bridgertons, who have, I think, 8 members. So a couple of them in the first season are set to debut. And then we're introduced to all these lords, right, at all these parties. And the women are then, tasked with getting married. Like, that's kind of how it plays out with these little kind of dramas kind of throughout, right? There's a bit of an attempt at character development, which I think is hit or miss, to be fair. And then you have like a few villains and characters that you kind of attach yourself to. There's a lot of eye candy, I would say, as well, which everyone loves. So you have a formula that kind of works in, for people that don't have a lot of time maybe to invest, that might have time to kind of binge a show. This is kind of perfect for someone that does have an affinity for period pieces, but kind of on a shallower, kind of, I don't want to say forgettable, but something to enjoy and then forget.
Right.
That's how I see Bridgerton, to be honest.
It's bubblegum pop, if you think about it, because
yeah.
it's one of those things where it's just good to watch, but you walk away and you automatically forget about it.
You completely forget about it. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Shonda Rhimes did here, because we mentioned that this is based off, the source material from the books.
Mm-hmm.
He's giving you this kind of diversity of characters and this the introduction of kind of real sort of characters that you might not see in past series that you can relate to. So you have a lot of different races introduced to this British era that I've never seen it. I mean, I don't know if you have, but it's like, wow, like if you're a lover of these period pieces and you see all these characters that look like you're like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So that might hook you in initially. But I do think, and I think unfortunately we're kind of in agreement on this, it's not a strong TV series, and it's kind of unfortunate because we were talking about, let's talk about Bridgerton and why it's popular. I think I have reasons why, but I weep for them.
It's just an opportunity for cosplay, because
yeah,
I mean, because when I saw that report about the scam in Detroit, what really astounded me was the fact that these were people who were willing to shell out hundreds of bucks to buy the dresses, to look like the character, to get their hair done, to do all of that.
Yeah, it was in DC as well. Like, they did the whole tour and it was extremely popular.
But that what also strikes me, because as I was watching the episodes from each season, the characters kind of they don't stick with you. There's nothing about them that makes you say, wow, I didn't realize that was going on. And furthermore, what I also find interesting is the fact that with these characters, there really isn't that much of a change, because apart from Lord Hastings deciding, what, maybe I do want to get married afterwards, they really don't.
But no children.
Yeah, they really don't change that much from beginning to end.
Yeah, I agree. But I have to ask you though, like,
yeah,
from what you've seen, did anyone stick out to like the formula of character to root for, villain, drama that takes place? Did anything stick out to you?
Well, if you had to force me to give an answer,
Yeah, I'm forcing you.
I mean, I would probably say Hastings, really, from season one, but that's only because you can sort of, I guess, understand why he is the way he is.
Right.
It's not now that doesn't mean I agree with him or I root for him or anything like that. It's that you can sort of develop a sympathy for him because of the fact that he had this terrible childhood. He was very much distant from his father, and then, when he gets older, he decides what's the best way to stick it to the old man than to say, I'm never getting married. Now that is a very childish thing to say and a very childish thing to do. But I would say he's probably the one character I could sort of understand where he's coming from.
Okay.
I mean, everybody else is just. I mean, there's nothing about them that sticks out.
Yeah, wallpaper. Yeah. Well, what about? And I don't know if you saw enough to kind of follow the drama of Lady Whistlebaum, right? This is the gossip rag, so to speak, that kind of opens every show and ends every show, right? So everyone in high society reads this gossip rag. And this is where gossip comes out about different people, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that is, and so the queen, has this personal mission to find out who the person is, right? And
that's what I don't get. So is she like, does she have like a vendetta against Lady Whistledown?
Yeah, so she has a vendetta because she wants to control the machinations of high society.
Oh, okay.
The Lady Whistlebaum is kind of preempting her, right? Like, so it's she wants to control everything. She's the one that, when the debutantes kind of present themselves at the first kind of debutante ball, she anoints a diamond, essentially, that is going to be the most favored debutante to all the suitors.
So it's kind of like the Rose in The Bachelor, almost.
I guess kind of. I haven't seen The Bachelor that much, but yeah. So like she sets about to have her kind of staff, her right hand man, try and uncover who this person is. It's like this whole thing. Now that part honestly was kind of interesting because I thought it was a smart move to unveil who she was early enough so it didn't drag out. We've seen TV series that drag out, like Gossip Girl, right? With what was the person, A or whoever the person that was telling. It's very similar to Gossip Girl in that it's kind of the same kind of thing where someone is telling gossip about this, this kind of group of,
right. The person is kind of pushing the narrative forward.
Exactly. Yeah. And so we discover who that person is at the end of the first season. And then that kind of creates a bit more drama. Is she going to be found out? Right. So now she has to kind of team up with other people. She kind of stops for a bit and kind of all this stuff that kind of happens. That wasn't a bad, that actually wasn't bad. Like that storyline wasn't, I didn't disagree with that storyline.
But they didn't put enough emphasis on it. That's the thing. It's like,
little by little. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things where it's there, but it's in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Like they mainly want you to focus on these beautiful young people who are trying to hook up, and there's always that one daughter who's like, "Oh, I'm never going to find anybody because nobody likes
always me." That. Yeah. So the tropes are there, right? This is not new territory. This is retread. I wouldn't call it trite though. Maybe you would, but I wouldn't call it trite. Mm-hmm. This is a reimagining of the period piece. The writing, as I told you off air, could be stronger. And I thought that the acting was uneven. That's kind of, I think, potentially something you're going to get with Shonda. It's not, Shonda has a formula, I think. And to me, she gave you just enough. It's not my favorite genre, but there are enough people that she can have an audience that would appreciate it better. And one thing I will say, and we'll have to talk about this kind of offline, is I've heard that Queen Charlotte was significantly better.
Mm-hmm.
Queen Charlotte is the origin story of the queen that we see in Bridgerton. And I do wonder if kind of doing an origin story versus this depiction of the entire high society is a stronger presentation.
Right.
And so I'm actually going to try and check that out. But, we can kind of talk about why, Bridgerton was so popular, but you and I are not the audience for it, unfortunately. I think that's the unfortunate thing. And
me for sure. That's
of course you for sure, because you're like, what is the historical, like, what are we talking about here? There's absolutely no historical context. There's no racial discrimination, which is like, okay, sure. Everybody is living in this utopia bliss. And then you have just a bunch of, diverse characters acting as you've seen in previous period pieces. That's kind of what you have.
But the issue I have with this is the fact that these are one-dimensional characters. I mean, when you look at them, you kind of know what they're all about. I think like in episode 2 in season 1, there was that one guy who was very, very eager to get married to one of the Bridgerton sisters, and you come to find out that he's a bit of a
guy.
Yeah, he's a bit of a cad, and you kind of figure out, even before the revelation, you kind of figure out there's something not right with
something
this guy.
like, or he has a past, right?
Yeah, I mean, what you see is what you get, because because to your point, there really isn't that much character development. I mean, they pretty much remain the same from beginning to end, and that's and that's what frustrates me, is the fact that even if you have a show that's as shallow and as poorly written as Bridgerton, you would think that there would be some changes to the character, some development where they go from from one state of being, in other words, like a naive ingenue at the beginning, episode 1, to being a bit more wiser, more streetwise by episode 8. But I never got that.
Yeah, so let's take as an example, because you mentioned it earlier, Duke of Hastings, right?
Yeah.
So we're introduced to him, and he comes back from, he went to Oxford with Lord Bridgerton. He comes back, they're friends. He kind of has an eye on Daphne in that they have these interesting run-ins, right? And you think there might be a bit of an attraction there. He's completely, as he tells Lord Bridgerton, kind of over trying to get married, right? Like, he's just kind of over that. The women are just falling over themselves, right? Because he's honestly very attractive. Like, let's be honest. So he's very attractive. Then,
it's also Duke, so.
I mean, it doesn't hurt, right? Yeah. So over the course of the season, now we're kind of seeing, first of all, like the role Lady Danbury played in his life, but also kind of what his upbringing was, right? So his mom died in childbirth. His father wanted an heir come hell or high water. And as he grows up, he has trouble speaking. He's fine with writing and reading, like, right? Because he has a private tutor. He has a speech impediment. And his father essentially shuns him. Like, they have absolutely no relationship. And Lady Danbury takes him on as like her personal project, essentially. And, there's this, as you mentioned off air, there's this, thing he whispers to his father, like on his deathbed, about, I will never produce an heir. The line will die with me. And so, like, he tells Daphne, who he eventually marries, but they have this passion, and appears to be this love between them, that I will not produce an heir, like I can't. And you mentioned how this seems to be kind of a childish kind of vendetta. And it's interesting because I thought, honestly, before it was kind of revealed to her kind of this reason, which she ultimately kind of forgives him for, was because his mom died in childbirth. and that he didn't want anything to happen to her. That's what I thought was going to be revealed. And that potentially might have been more, impactful than what it really was, to be honest. And, he seems, I don't know, like
he's very repressed. That's what I got from him.
Yeah, and there's the passion part, which is gonna appeal to audiences, right? The passion that they have, that they show, in the series. But their attempts at character development, I thought the best example they had for character development was Kate Sharma in season 2.
Mm-hmm.
So Kate Sharma starts her family, which consists of Edwina, her sister, and then Lady Mary, her mother. They came from Bombay on a ship, and they're staying with Lady Danbury for the season. The whole point, we learn, is for Edwina to marry, to take care of the whole family. This is something we've seen in tons of previous period pieces. There's this duty to marry, love, not love, who cares?
There's a bit of a taming of the shrew element as well, because because if you're familiar with the play, it's this idea of getting Kate, the older sister, to get married first, so then the younger sister can get married afterwards.
Right. But Kate is like, I'm going to be a spinster. I'm not worried about being married myself.
Yeah.
And Edwina is kind of portrayed as this very childlike person with absolutely no agency, right? And over the course of this second season, she kind of grows into her own and becomes more independent with independent thoughts. And I felt like Kate, she came there as a mission because, as we come to learn, her grandparents said her sister has to marry a man of English nobility, and then she'll have this large dowry that can be presented, right? So the whole plan is for Edwina to marry Lord Bridgerton, and that had been the plan. Edwina was anointed the diamond by Queen Charlotte, right? And Kate is in the background. Meanwhile, she's having all these interactions with Lord Bridgerton that kind of indicate there's there's something there. And there's this back and forth that to me was drawn out way too long. That Edwina kind of comes to realize towards the end of the second season that they have feelings, like real true feelings for each other. And the queen ultimately says, I'm going to introduce you to my nephew, the prince, blah, blah, blah. She doesn't appear in the third season.
Yeah.
So, eventually they get married, but that whole, the whole courtship, which was kind of in secret between Kate and Lord Bridgerton, was drawn out to a point where it drove me crazy. The way it was drawn out and the way that they had done it in secret, and, she's like, look, I just want my sister married and I'll go back to India, and I'm leaving and I'll go back to India. And then, Lord Bridgerton, played by Jonathan Bailey from, Wicked, is just, emotionally wrought, and he's overacting and it drove me crazy. I got it, Luca. It drove me crazy. And these are beautiful people. So and it's just like, okay, obviously you love each other. What are you all doing?
It's like the old, the old saying, just shut up and make out already.
Shut up and do it already.
Yeah, exactly.
What are you doing? So I think there was an attempt to understand her in the second half of the second season that I thought was the best example of character development, in that what Edwina said to her sister was, everything you wanted from me, you actually wanted for yourself.
Right.
And you say, because she's, I think the way they termed it was 6 and 20, right? So she's 26. And this idea that I don't need a man, I don't know that, I don't want love, all this stuff is completely wrong. You want love and you will submit to love, but this whole idea that you have this duty and all that is BS. So I think, that attempt to develop her character was probably the best example. And this is a low bar in the show. And, the attempt to understand, and we haven't talked about, and we can, what are your thoughts on Lord Bridgerton, the older brother, the head of the family, essentially?
I mean, I don't know how to exactly characterize the guy, because on the one hand, he's been thrust into this position of being the head of the family.
Right. His father dies from a bee sting or something like that.
Yeah. But, you kind of get the feeling he's trying to live up to the expectations, but he kind of wants to have his cake and eat it too. Because season 1, he spends most of his time with that opera singer. And even when his mother reprimands him and tells me he needs to step up, you can tell he's still dragging his feet about it. I mean, he eventually steps up, but it's like he's doing it kicking and screaming all the way there.
There's an emotional maturity that, even knowing his backstory, is not really explained. It's like, everyone has this duty. Yeah, I mean, all of this. This is how things work. The debutantes, they're presented at a certain age, and they have their dresses, and they go to the ball. Mm-hmm. You are the head of the family. You get married. You have children. Like, that's how this society works.
Yeah, and you're supposed to like set up the deal and arrange everything for the sisters.
Right. And so, but for
a few moments later.
Sorry about that. So, my Wi-Fi went out, and I'm trying to reconnect it. And so, hold on.
Okay.
So give me a second, and it'll be back up in probably about 3 minutes, and then I'll switch over.
Okay.
A few moments later.
Okay, I'm trying to do visual effects so it doesn't look weird.
A few moments later.
I don't know how. Let's see.
A few moments later.
Okay, I'll just hold it like this. Okay, I'm with you.
All right. So go ahead with with what you were saying.
So, for me, I think, Lord Bridgerton, hold on. No, what is these settings? So Lord Bridgerton, to me, was a golden opportunity to develop a specific character who played a prominent role in the show. And, for, the supporting character, to me, got the best character development. But I don't like how they played out the relationship kind of on the side with the older sister while he was to be betrothed to the younger sister. I think in any normal period piece, he would marry the younger sister, and he would have this kind of yearning for the older sister, and that's how it would play out. This is not how these period pieces play out. Like, they don't. Like, he would just marry the younger sister. That's how it would happen. And Bridgerton does, this is, again, this is part of the fantasy. This is all like giving the audience what it wants. But in these period pieces, whenever you're in the high society and you have these duties to provide for your family, all this stuff, you don't get that. Everyone that's watched these knows that's not what happens. And that's the failing to me of Bridgerton is, you're presenting this fantasy where the audience gets what it wants, because you're like, oh, audience is going to root for love every time. That's not how it happens in those times. It never does. So, like, every now and then you get the Pride and Prejudice with Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, but that's generally not how it goes. And it's, I think, a disservice to the audience to do that, I think, again, because, we can point out all the flaws in this show, unfortunately, but I think that's one of them.
I mean, but do you think it was done deliberately with disregard to the whole notion of what is acceptable? Oh, uh, looks like she stepped out again.
Sorry.
So what I was saying, no, that's fine. So what I was saying was, so do you think this is just deliberate on their part to just disregard what has been conventional with period pieces in order to kind of satisfy what they think the narrative ought to be?
Well, so a good example, the best example I have that to me was kind of what you would think was true to life was the example of, I think her name was Maria Thompson. I don't know if you followed her story, right? So she comes to live with the Featheringtons, with the mother that's extremely conniving and the dad that's the gambling addict. So she's this distant cousin. She comes there. It turns out she's pregnant, right? She's not showing yet.
Yeah.
She's in the
Yeah.
right. So she's in the early stages of pregnancy. She's very attractive, and a lot of people are attracted to her. So Lady Featherington sees this as her opportunity to get her a really good and rich suitor. So she tries to find somebody for her. I think it was this guy. My God, he must have been in his 70s, right? She tries to marry one of the Bridgertons. I think it was Colin. She tries to hurry up the engagement. She tries to seduce him. So it would seem like the baby was his, all this different stuff. This was like probably, to me, the more compelling drama in the first season, right? Like, is she going to marry? What's going to happen to her? Because as it turns out, like, once she starts showing, it's a scandal. And she's going to be essentially put out, right? Like, who's going to support her? I don't, this sounds horrible to say, these women don't have skills, right? Like they're not going to have businesses or, jobs for themselves, right? So she needs to have security. So, she explains to one of the Featherington daughters, I think it was Penelope, she bonds with her and tells her that, she's in love with this guy, George, and how the pregnancy kind of happened. She was actually in love. She was going to service and, somehow she just ended up consummating, the relationship. She ends up pregnant. They exchange letters. He says he loves her. He doesn't, he wants to support her. As it turns out, he dies in the battlefield. And the guy, the 70-year-old, no longer wants her. She's focusing on Bridgerton. Lady Whistlebomb blows the whistle on her condition. And it comes out. So now she's unmarriable. Period.
All right.
George's brother comes. He's actually a lord, I believe. Was he a lord or a duke? No, he was a lord. And offers her a hand in marriage because he says, my brother died. I feel it's my duty to support you. And she turns him down. And Lady Featherington's like, are you freaking crazy? By the end of the first season, she does end up marrying him. And that's something that she kind of had to do, she was kind of forced to, that to me was the more realistic portrayal in Bridgerton. And kind of they revisit her. I think you probably saw it, right? I think was it the first episode of season 2 where Colin goes to see her, right?
Yeah. I mean, what I think is kind of interesting is the fact that Lady Fed.
Hello?
Yeah. So I was gonna say, I think it's kind of interesting that the way Lady Featherington goes about trying to accomplish the goals that she wants, because doesn't she like fake one of the letters from the soldier?
Yeah. So what she does is she fakes the letter so that she could find someone that can likely. Hello?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I don't know what's going on. So she can kind of fake the kind of what would you say, the disregard from George, right? To say that George is like, you're pregnant now, I don't want you anymore, you need to move on. That way she's not still pining for him, and now she can move on and find a better suitor. Like that was the whole point I got,
Yeah,
so
it's sort of that you need to be cruel to be kind kind of
yeah,
mentality.
yeah. So like I kind of understand that. And to me, I don't know. I thought that was like a situation that is very true to life, to be honest. Like I feel like that's something that you find in a lot of these period pieces. But if you have somebody that's pregnant, who's gonna want you?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it
Exactly.
sounds horrible to say, but who are you gonna be with? So I think like in that situation, like, you might say like she was kind of being cruel, but she had a plan. And I don't begrudge her, and I completely understand her position. A lot of, throughout the show, she was just like, we need to get rid of her. So yeah, I'm back. Yeah, so like you need to get rid of her, but I think honestly, I think that I think she was fair. I mean, for the time, I think she was fair. And I think, ultimately she saw that and eventually married her her dead lover's brother. And we revisit what her life is like. She ended up having twins, and she's like, he has his flowers and he's a great father, but you can tell they don't have a real relationship.
But I mean, that would be far more faithful to the time period than any of the other relationships you see.
Exactly. This is like remember Elizabeth Bennet's best friend Charlotte, right?
Mhm.
This is Charlotte, and she's like, this was the guy that had tried to court Elizabeth Bennet, and she's like, he has a home, I have this, I'm content. She was like, I don't need much, I'm fine. And so that to me should have been portrayed a bit more in the show, because that's more true to life from the time period. This idea that you're going to bring a period piece where all these people are falling in love and marrying is not what we've seen.
But that's the thing. It's because they're taking modern sensibilities and trying to force it into a period where where it wasn't exactly top priority. I was gonna say, you remember there was an episode in Game of Thrones where I think it was Sansa, she was supposed to get married.
Oh my God.
She said, but I don't really love the guy. And her mother basically says, well, do you think your father and I were in love when we first got married? You get married first, and then the love and affection kind of develops afterwards.
That's such a great example to me, because Game of Thrones throughout the series gave you situations where you're like, that's not right, that shouldn't happen, why did that happen? Like what, the Red Wedding episode, Robb Stark, right, was supposed to marry one of Lord Frey's daughters. Like he was supposed to, right, but he didn't want to. He had his own woman that he wanted to marry, right?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that how it happened? If I'm trying to recall correctly.
Yeah, and then Volder Frey, he ends up getting revenge as a result of the whole of his daughter being snubbed.
Exactly. And it's like, you have duties. Like, it's Game of Thrones really drove that home.
And what's interesting too, because because we talk about the expectation of duty in Bridgerton. I mean, you remember Lady Stark berates Robb for that. It's like,
exactly,
you have a duty to do, and you didn't fulfill it.
Period. Like, that's how it works. And so this idea that we can transfer like the modern woman and what she wants into that time period is crazy. It's crazy. Like,
Well, another thing too is the fact that you kind of get the sense that that the women in there are trying to assert themselves and be strong, and that the patriarchal, elements within it are kind of like, well, if this is what you want, I'll definitely support it, but but keep in mind, I mean, we're talking about a period where where the dudes were pretty much in charge. I mean, if dad says you're going to marry this guy, you can raise a fuss and do whatever you want, but this is what's going to happen.
And but Luca, that's the other part that's interesting too, because you don't see that in Bridgerton, that patriarchal figure, right? Like represented by this person or this person.
Because if you think about it, there, I think it was like episode 2 where Lord Bridgerton at first berates Daphne because she ends up punching out that guy. But then when he finds out what happened, he's like, well, I broke it off between the two of you, and I will support whatever decision you make. And I'm like, either Lord Bridgerton, really doesn't know what he's doing, or they're deliberately trying to make it sound like, men aren't really handling it. And what's also funny, too, is the fact that, Queen Charlotte obviously is the wife of King George III. Am I crazy? But I really don't see that much of the king. I know he kind of had his mental breakdown near the end,
breakdown. So we see that. So I forget what episode, and I don't know if you saw it, where we see him trying to recall some of their children who have died.
Yeah.
And him saying to her, what did you do to these people and these people? So now we know, okay, something's wrong here, right? And then we see him later in the second season where he comes out. So you see him, and now you understand the condition he's in, because he has his pajamas on, and then he has his royal jacket or whatever over that, and he's completely delirious. So now we kind of are like, okay, what is it? What's going on with him? And that's
they're overplaying it. That's the thing. He did have a mental breakdown, but they just dialed it up to 11 on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But another thing I want to mention too, and we talked about this before we started recording, is the fact that the entire setting of the story seems to live in a time bubble. It's like they don't really interact with the world around them, the wider world, I should say, around them. Because really, I think the only time we ever hear about any of the characters sort of being, elsewhere is when they find out that the soldier is, I think he's in Spain or something, fighting, and he gets killed.
Right. So Miss Thompson, right? So like her, right. So her, I don't want to say it, but baby daddy dies in the battlefield. So that's where we get our first indication that a war is being fought, kind of. And so there is a battlefield, so to speak. It's not explained, it's just referred to.
Right. And for someone who, for anybody who doesn't really have the knowledge of the historical context, you would just think it was just some faraway thing. But I mean, keep in mind the Regency period, pretty much, was dominated by 2 wars. One was, the revolution here, but also you had the ascendancy of Napoleon. So presumably when they're talking about him getting killed in Spain, this is during the Peninsular Campaign. But and this is just me being a historical nerd, so bear with me, Dara. I can't imagine them not having a conversation, or them bringing up the fact that old Boney's at it again on the continent, or the fact that one of the characters, other characters like maybe Lord Bridgerton maybe has a brother, or one of the brothers, or one of the cousins, sends a letter back and they're saying, oh, well, he's currently in Italy right now and they're being licked. It's just,
and there's because Colin, as we know, he travels all over the world, right? He comes back different, but there's no historical context, obviously on purpose. Luca, this is on purpose, because we'll go back to the beginning, this is fluff.
Mm-hmm.
This is complete fluff. This is enjoyable. This is forgettable. That's the way you digest it. And, I do want to go back to this agency thing with the men and the women, because, this idea that we've seen where the father says, I don't care if you don't love him, you will marry him, is just not there. Even when Miss Thompson eventually marries the George's brother, that's more Lady Featherington's doing than the father. Like, the only thing he says is, we're not sending her back, like throughout her time spent at the Featherington house. But also, I would say that there's a lot of talk about this want from these women. Eloise Bridgerton is an example. You know, she's the one that forms this relationship with I don't know if he was like a paper boy or something, but she talks to Kate Sharma about this whole idea of being a spinster, as well as Penelope Featherington, who of course is Lady Whistlebaum. She has kind of her own whatever independent business, and she talks to Madame Delacroix about kind of having her own thing, right? Because I think Penelope doesn't expect to get married, right? Like she's debuted for like, I think 3 years at that point, and she feels like it's not going to happen for her. So she's kind of like, I need to make my own way or whatever. And there's a lot of talk about this, women as being independent, and that's insane.
I mean, if you think about it too, it kind of follows the same beats as what you see in Downton Abbey, really, because because what you see with the sisters pretty much mirrors what goes on with them. Now, I will say this: I mean, the whole female assertion of independence makes far more sense in Downton Abbey, because you're getting to that period where the suffragette movement begins to push for equal rights, whereas here it's like you're 200 years too early on the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, you're way too early on this. You have duties. Like, it's not, there's no talk of going to private school and being educated. Like, all this stuff, that's out the window. You debut for a reason, and that's your duty is to get married. You love him or you don't love him. Likely you will not love him.
Right.
That's the point. And, to not really explore that part of it, except in like one instance, is weird. Because even Downton Abbey, and we talked off camera about how much stronger that TV show is in the writing, right?
Yeah.
And I appreciate Downton Abbey mainly because I appreciate that the servants have agency and that the characters were a bit more compelling and more well developed. You had people to root for. You had, the butler, I believe, I forgot his name.
Who, Bates?
That was the villain. No, Bates you root for, right? But then the other
I know who you're talking about.
Guy, the swarmy guy. He's the villain, right? And then the other woman is the villain. So you had all of that, and it's like, Bridgerton is so you have to understand kind of going in, and I guess I don't know how long it took you to realize this is what I'm watching. Okay, I'm not supposed to digest this and understand it in the context of this. They're not presenting this in a historical perspective from a woman actually in that time period who has these responsibilities. They're not doing that at all. They're saying, push that to the side. We're kind of doing it differently. This is our fantasy. This is fluff. It's bingeable and it's forgettable. Period.
Right. And I guess for me, as as someone who enjoys watching movies and TV shows and breaking everything down,
that's the problem.
When I look at something, when I look at something like Bridgerton, there's nothing there. I mean, what you see is what you get. Yeah. Now take another series that's set in the Regency period, Taboo, starring Tom Hardy. There are just so many layers to that, and it's a far more complex. The characters are far more complex. You have no idea what the motivations are. You don't know where they're going, but there's just something about them that makes them interesting to watch. The same would go for Peaky Blinders. I mean, Peaky Blinders is set in the same time period as Downton Abbey, but the characters and the way they interact is just so compelling. Whereas here, it's like, if Daphne and Hastings get married, great. If not, I mean, it's no skin off my back. And what's frustrating too is the fact that you have all these different characters being introduced. And at some point, and for me, it didn't take long, so it kind of tells you a lot about me. Right. I kind of lost track as to who exactly I'm supposed to focus on. Really? Yeah,
I know you mentioned that, and you were just like, "Who am I following here?" There's kind of this kind of family, and then you have this family, and then who do I care about exactly?
It's every letter in the alphabet in terms of storyline because and I don't know what your thoughts are, but it kind of felt like they want you to care about story A, but there's story X as well. Oh, but then there's story M. You got to pay attention to this as well, not to mention story, I don't know, story D. And it's at some point you just have to be like, you have to have a notebook or something in order to keep track of this because there's no way you're going to know what's going on because some of them sometimes they intertwine with each other and other times they just run parallel. You know,
and I thought season 2, because I told you I was really tired of the the Sharma sisters and this whole drama with Lord Bridgerton. I personally was more invested in the Featherington story because the husband had died at the end of season 1, and as we know from Sensibility, as I mentioned, now the next male heir inherits that house. Right. And so now Lady Featherington is like, oh God, we can't have him marry someone in society. I'm getting pushed out, right? Like she already got pushed out of her bedroom. She's trying to salvage everything for her and her 3 daughters. He comes into the scene. He seems fine. He's like, yeah, I'm ready to pay the dowry for one of the daughters that was going to get married to the awkward guy. He turns out to be a con man, right? Like, so to me, that was the most dramatic storyline in season 2 that I was more interested in than any of the other ones, to be honest.
Right. And that's the frustrating thing too, is that when they do develop an interesting storyline, it's all the way in the background. You kind of have to sift through all of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're waiting out to revisit it because he's like, so far this con is working, right? He's claiming he has these mines in America, and we, learn he's like this straight con man who has this like fake jewelry, and they're making money, and he has these commitments, and he's like, we can take this show on the road, and we can go to America. She's like, what about my daughters? And he was like, we'll send for them. And then she's like into it, and then she's like, hold up. Whoa. No, this can't happen, right? Because she's just like, wait, no, my daughters are the most important, right? So it was fascinating too, because after her husband died and he comes, the money doesn't exactly come initially because he pays for the dowry with something fake, right? And so now they have to worry about that, and they don't have money. They had to fire all their staff, so this is like a scandal. So she really has to go into protective mode, like to save the family. All this stuff she has to do, and she still actually, you saw the first episode of the 3rd season. She forges these documents to say that as long as one of her daughters produces a male heir, and she forges his name, because her right-hand woman is a great forger because she forged the letters that were essentially from George, from all that stuff. Yeah, that to me is the most compelling storyline, was the Featheringtons. Not the Bridgertons.
And I was going to say, like, as despicable as we can think of Lady Featherington, you can also develop a sort of sympathy for her, because
total sympathy,
right?
Total sympathy,
because as much as you want to question her tactics, it's one of those things where she'll do whatever she needs to do in order to ensure the survival of her family.
Period.
But
and
again,
you understand it, right? Because you're like, so what's the alternative here? What if everything comes crashing down? Where does that leave her? And she's cognizant of that. So she's like, I got to do everything in my power. And it's fascinating. So it's like she's doing everything she can. And that, to me, she's the most fascinating character, right?
She's also the most realistic and most pragmatic, because everybody else on the show just seems too idealistic. Their heads are in the clouds.
Oh my God, that and there's a bit vapid, like, I have a bit of sympathy for Lady Bridgerton because she lost her husband and everything, but she's also trying to kind of make sure she's still at the top of the food chain, so to speak, in high society. There's depth to her.
Yeah, but she's in a much more relatively safer position than Lady Featherington.
Safe. She has, if everybody saw the country house in the 2nd season, she'll be fine.
Right,
You know,
right.
Lord Bridgerton makes this huge donation so that one of the Bridgerton sons can go to this art school that he was hoping to go to. Colin is traveling all over the world. They're fine. But Featherington is a better representation of someone who wants to maintain status and will do whatever it takes. And she's way more compelling and honestly played very well.
Funny if that's the same actress who was in the HBO series Rome. She played Augustus's mother.
And she, you know, the thing about her, I really think the camera loves her. She's very striking, I think. And I love her dress and everything they do with her, I actually love. She's very compelling as a character on the show.
What I would be interested to see, because Lady Featherington is going out of her way to make sure that her family survives no matter what, is to see what the alternative would be.
Yes.
Like what would happen if she didn't, because we're familiar with the time period where if you fall really, really hard. And we're talking about a period where there really isn't a safety net. Like once you fall, like,
because what is she going to do? But it's interesting too, because what we learned in the second season, well, actually the first episode of the third season, you know, as you know, Penelope, her daughter, is Lady Whistleborn, whatever. And so she has money. She's hiding this money from her family. What kind of money does she have? You know, she's hoarding this money that she uses because people are buying the pamphlets or whatever. And her best friend calls her out on it. And she's really upset that, you know, she came to be Lady Whistleborn. And, you know, I really sympathize. Honestly, Penelope is also very sympathetic because she was actually trying to protect Eloise because the queen thought she was the person that was writing these. So she said something negative about Eloise in order to protect her. And then Eloise kind of cast her out, which I thought was a mistake. And so I think in the third season, which both of us haven't seen all of it yet, I think that the relationship will probably be repaired in the third season. But
right.
Penelope is a interesting character and one to root for, to be honest. Even though she is the gossip columnist, so to speak, she's someone to root for. I got to be honest.
But I mean, I tip my hat off to her because she's at least pragmatic. She's taking something that she's good at and applying her skills to generate some sort of income. You know?
And she's right, but also she's making partnerships, right? So she partners with Madame Delacroix, right, who already knows who she is, and she's doing it to protect her identity, but also, you know, she's able to get information. They have formed this partnership as well. I don't know how realistic that is, right? But it's an interesting kind of side storyline because it's not one of the main ones because they're focusing on the Bridgertons.
Right.
But it's an interesting side storyline, you know. So, you know, there's good and bad, you know, just to summarize just kind of the series, but there's good and bad with the series. But I think that, you know, overall, like, there has to be more realism to portray this period for us to believe it. And I have to believe these writers are not stupid and they knew that, you know, what we're doing doesn't comport with those times. And they said, fine. These are not dumb writers. They knew what they were doing.
But it's, you know, it's one of those, you know, laws of marketing where you appeal to your target audience, right?
And you say this is what they want. They want steamy sex scenes. They want love, and they want true love, and they want to portray this era with the actual finding of true love, which is okay, sure. You know, yeah, I guess this can happen. And then they want to have these independent-minded female characters.
Right. I mean,
and they want to center the women characters because they centered the women in this show also. Yeah. Women are centered.
Yeah, exactly. They're the focus of the story, and the men are kind of like in the wing. But
Exactly.
I was going to say, because you mentioned something very interesting before we started, was the fact that they're pretty much following the same line of thinking in what we've seen with previous previous iterations of the romance, or the steamy romance, I should say, like with 50 Shades of Grey. I would even go so far as to include the Twilight series, because Twilight kind of took
Fair.
because think about Twilight took the convention of the vampire and kind of flipped it on its head.
Yeah,
And
but let's pull that thread though, because people that saw it on the big screen,
yeah,
think about Anne Rice, correct? Interview with the Vampire, in terms of like, there are people that are interested in the novels, but Anne Rice to them was the standard. Is that fair or no?
yeah. Well, I'll say this, like, because I used to read a lot of Anne Rice's novels
Yeah.
back in the day. As much as I didn't care for the romantic stuff, I will give her props for remaining faithful to the lore of the vampire.
Right.
What Stephanie Myers was she took the romantic steamy elements that we saw in Anne Rice, but she didn't take the other elements that made Anne Rice's character so compelling.
But let me ask you this, because now we might connect all of this, Luca. Did she dumb it down?
Who?
Stephanie Myers.
Oh, definitely. What she did to vampire lore is what Shonda Rhimes did with Jane Austen, basically.
Right.
It's and it's frustrating too, because I've read some of Austen's work. And if you think about it, she was writing during a period where there was a lot of cultural, social, and political upheaval.
And she was a feminist, right? To a degree. Can you say
Right.
that? I think we can say that.
Well, I will even add, some people have even listed her as a Gothic novelist, which is fair, because if you take some novels like Northanger Abbey, that could definitely fit within the Gothic genre. But I feel like with what the writers of Bridgerton have done is they've taken the fluff of that period, and they've basically glued on what they think is appealing to young people, i.e., a lot of virtue signaling, DEI, that kind of stuff. And they've said this, behold, we've created something new, when they really haven't. They've just basically, picked and choose what they thought was good. Well, what period do you think would be the most romantic? Well, you remember that music video that Taylor Swift did all those years ago, where it's kind of set in the Regency period? We'll take some elements of that. We'll take bits of that. Dara, I sincerely think someone must have watched that Taylor Swift music video one too many times and thought, we're going to go with that period. We're going to go with that visual aesthetic.
But this is fascinating, the thread you're talking about, because if anyone goes back and revisits the Pride and Prejudice BBC miniseries, that is, in my top 3 for sure, they use almost all of what they use in the script is Jane Austen's words, right?
Because they're so perfectly written.
But they are, that's my point. They're perfectly written and you can understand it. Why do you think people are so dumb that they can't understand it? That's what I don't understand. And I saw, 20 minutes of the first episode yesterday, and I'm just like, this is perfect. It starts off with, Elizabeth Bennet, it's Mr. Darcy and Mr. Bingham, and he's saying, I'm going to buy this amazing estate. And the mother is saying, Mr. Bingham is going to move. We have to meet him, like all this stuff. And she's shrill, of course, but her whole focus is marrying her daughters off to wealth. Like, that's the whole focus, because that's what it was like. And it's like, it's understandable. There's nothing about it that's confusing, not compelling. They're being true to the times. Is that bad to be true to the times? Like, why do you need to reinterpret things so people feel better about themselves?
But that's been a recurring theme over the past 10 years.
It's disturbing.
But I was going to say this. So yesterday, I did an interview with a filmmaker who's from Uzbekistan. He lives in LA, and we were talking about Soviet movies. And one of the movies was Solaris, that was directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. I don't know if you've ever seen that.
It sounds familiar, but I don't think I have.
So we were talking about Tarkovsky, and and we were saying that what Tarkovsky does is he creates a lot of ambiguity, but he trusts the audience. He knows the audience is not stupid. They'll be able to figure out, interpret one way or another what's going on in the story. Whereas with Western filmmaking, everything has to be spoon-fed. I'm going to take what I said yesterday and apply it here. What they're doing in Bridgerton is spoon-feeding you, but they're not even spoon-feeding you the right material. It's empty calories, if you want to look at it that way. There's nothing substantial about it. They're telling you this is what it is. Go on and take it. They're not leaving any ambiguities or anything that you would want to say, well, that's a very interesting thread. I wonder why they went in that direction.
Yeah, I would have compared it to Tyler Perry, who, just beats you over the head with metaphors and all that. I think the best example, and I know we're not talking about movies here, but and I've always thought the director that did that the best was Ang Lee. Mm-hmm. Which was like, and Brokeback Mountain is, one of my favorite films, but he was able to give the audience credit, right, for their intelligence. At the same time, creating this film that had artistic merit in it, that had the best example I would say in Brokeback Mountain is how, I think Jake dealt with them being apart versus how, oh God, I forget Heath Ledger's character, right? So he has his shirt, right, in his, was it bathroom or closet? And he completely went inside himself, right? He didn't see anybody. He didn't go anywhere. We see that when his daughter visits, and he's just completely heartbroken. But he keeps it all inside. Whereas Jake goes and he has these trysts with all these men, right? And that's how they each dealt with being apart and longing for each other, right? So, there's just a way to do things that, we've seen in movies before or TV shows before that we're just, it's just so unfair to an audience to do this to them.
And it's a lost art too, because you rarely see that anymore. It's the fact
so
that
bad.
And what's also condescending too, because they're basically saying you are too stupid to understand what's going on here. We have to prepackage this. Yeah, exactly. And
so unfair.
And that's what I find so frustrating about Bridgerton is the fact that it's not giving you any leeway. These are the lanes you need to stick in order to get it. But the way they're doing it is just so chaotic. It's like there's really nothing for me to get because I don't know which lane I'm supposed to be in.
But also we want you to feel happy. We don't want you sad.
Well, we want you to feel like a certain type of happy. Really.
Right, because you're rooting for this character. Let's say Daphne, right? Let's say Daphne didn't choose Duke of Hastings. Let's say she ended up choosing that guy, who had a maid and a son with his maid, right? Let's say she ended up with him. We would be devastated. Probably more realistic.
But see, it's a shallow kind of devastation. I'll give you a good example of a good kind of the kind that kind of hits you in the soul. Did you ever see Tess of the D'Urbervilles?
No, I've heard of it.
There's a BBC series with Hans Matheson, and the story is that
you mentioned, I have to see all of them.
So what happens is that Tess she's supposed to marry a guy, but she ends up killing him, and she's on the run, and she falls in love with this young man. And throughout this entire time, they're living on borrowed time because she'll eventually get caught. And in the last episode, the lover is like standing on the hill overlooking the prison, and they raise a flag, and that's the indication that she's been hung. And this entire time, like, you feel for the characters because they want to make it work so bad. They like, if they could just run away and live this ideal life, but they can't. And that's and here with Bridgerton, there's no. It's kind of like the story of the Buddha as a young man, where he's living in this bubble where he's not exposed to tragedy, he's not exposed to any sadness, and the kind of tragedy that he's exposed to use modern parlance, is first world problems, really.
What's the film with the woman that was in the Ex Machina, and she was a queen or a princess and she was having a relationship. She was married to nobility. She was in nobility and she was married and she was having an affair with like a right-hand man or someone, and they're executed in the end. Do you remember that movie?
I don't think so, but it sounds pretty similar to Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
Yeah, I mean, because that's what it reminds me of. Alicia Vikander. Okay, let me find
Alicia Vikander. Okay.
Alicia Vikander. What's the film?
But that's the thing. Like there has to be. Say what?
No, that's it. It's like you're like, oh my God, they're together. This is great. This is love. They're gonna run off together. No, they're not. No, they're not.
Because they're doomed from the very. Is it a royal affair, by the way?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. That was it.
But that's the thing. But because that's what makes it all the more beautiful. Or even, or even something like Jane Eyre. Because I remember seeing that one, and for the longest time, Jane, she's taking, she and Mr. Rochester, they kind of have this on again, off again relationship, kind of like with what you see with Daphne and Hastings. But then Rochester suffers a mishap where he's blind, and then Jane comes to take care of him. They develop this relationship and they fall in love because of the fact that he becomes reliant on her. And the way that it's executed is just so wonderfully done. The storyline is just so beautiful. And yet, for whatever reason, when the people of Bridgerton try to do it, you just have to sit there and be like, what the hell am I looking at here? What are you doing?
Yeah,
it's like,
and it was so stunted the way that they had their kind of like her kind of trying to find out, because she kind of tries to leave him and then she kind of resolves everything because she like learned something from the servants about his past, which she didn't know. Now she feels betrayed, but the whole reveal, everything was stunted, and the way that it was kind of, from her perspective, confronting him and all this stuff, it was just like.
But that's the thing. You don't feel any sympathy for their circumstances.
Exactly, and it was just like you had to develop that better. I don't know that, maybe the backstory should have been a bit more compelling. Maybe because you talked about how it was like this childish kind of revenge thing for him to say, "I'm not going to give you an heir." That thread should have been better. Right. And I don't know if that was based on the books. I have no idea. But it was done very poorly.
I mean, to be fair, they kind of shot themselves in the foot from the very first scene in episode 1. I mean, I felt like what happened in episode 1 set the tone, and you kind of figured out pretty quickly. Yeah, they're really not going for what you think they're going for. It's just eye candy all the way through.
Right. Especially the way he's introduced, right? Like the way he's introduced and everything, you're like, okay, well, this is kind of where we're at with this show. And as it develops, again, for me in the first season, the most compelling storyline was the pregnant distant cousin. That was the most compelling storyline for me. In the second season, it was Lady Featherington and trying to provide for her family. So, that was the most real portrayal of the error. And, everything else was kind of fun fluff, kind of.
But I let me add this as well. I feel like with Lady Featherington, it's not really a pressing issue. Like you kind of get the feeling she's going to end up, on her feet either way, right?
I don't know that I felt like that. I can understand that feeling, but I don't know that I felt like that. And I feel like I know she didn't feel like that based on kind of her actions, especially in the second season, that she needed to act because she kind of, there were some machinations behind the scenes to try and get him to be betrothed to her daughter, not Penelope. What was the other? I forget, but her other daughter.
Eloise?
What was it?
Eloise?
No, there was someone else, but she would be betrothed to her that way. No other woman would come in because I think there was another family that was potentially he would be betrothed to so that Featherington wouldn't be like moved to another bedroom and potentially out of the house. So I felt like that was kind of real.
But that's the thing. Like it's kind of real. It's not. There's really no serious sense of urgency. If that makes any sense to you.
No, that's fair.
Because unlike what you see in like Tess of the D'Urbervilles or Jane Eyre or any of the Jane Austen adaptations, there really is no sense that they could lose it and that's it. It's not because like with Rochester and Jane Eyre, I mean, he goes from being at the top of the world like Hastings to where now he is an invalid who's dependent on someone to take care of him. That I mean, there's a sense of urgency because in that time period, if you're in that condition, I mean, you're up shit creek without a paddle. Whereas here in Bridgerton, it's like even if they do encounter some sort of like mishap, in the next episode or a few episodes down, that's going to get resolved and everybody kind of walks away, happy la-di-da.
And the reason we know that is because they don't want the audience to see that.
Right. And I think and it goes back to what we were saying earlier, where it's nothing short of insulting the intelligence of the audience.
It's so
because how do you know the audience wouldn't feel more connected to it? I mean, if let's say for instance, if something were to happen to Lord Bridgerton, right? Let's say he like suffered a horse riding accident and he ends up in a wheelchair.
Very believable situation.
Right. I mean, how do we not know that the situation doesn't become more dire, more urgent, and we don't develop more of an emotional connection, more of a sympathy because of that helplessness? Why is it that we have to be spoon-fed this sort of lollipop kingdom, version of the world where nothing bad ever happens?
I really don't understand it, Luca.
I
don't understand why they did that to the audiences. I guess they're just like, we're just going to make a fluff period piece and we're going to have diversity of characters. We're going to have more real characters, but we're not going to focus on the writing. We're not going to focus on the period. We're kind of going to do our very different interpretation of what that period was like. Okay.
And you're gonna like it, damn if you
and you're gonna like it. We're gonna throw in some sex scenes so you're satisfied, because that's the romance novel kind of audience. So we're not gonna upset you, right? Everybody's gonna turn out fine, and everybody has like the only person that we kind of feel for is Penelope, right? But she also has Lady Whistlebaum, so she has kind of her way of getting revenge. In that sense, like she has a bit of power and agency. But, in the third season, we're kind of introduced to her showing some vulnerability to Colin saying, I'm never going to be married, right? Like her believing that. So, whatever.
Well, that is going to do it for our discussion of Bridgerton. I mean, are we making too much out of nothing? But who knows? But let us know down in the comments below what you think. Do you think Bridgerton is all fluff, or do you think there's more to it? And as always, thanks so much for tuning in. We'll catch you in the next one.